we sort of finally get to we bring up the end of this with a critical word which we've heard so much, beauty. And beauty has long been an unfashionable word for architects. Not so much now. I mean, the Royal Fine Arts Commission Trust has got a Building Beauty Award. However, it has been for a long time. In fact, a well-known landscape architect, who I don't think is in the room, once decided to summarize it, said, well, just call it pretty. It means much the same thing. It's a kind of sort of bourgeois naff word that we simply shouldn't use. But it is a word in public use. It's a word people use all the time. So when people say it to one another, they kind of expect to be understood. And we, as design professionals, there's a lot of us in this room, are design professionals. We may not like the word, or we may have our own meaning on it. But as we're design professionals, most of what we do is actually for the public. So and then the speakers are going to talk about, I hope, one way or another, they say pretty much what they like, I know, I'm sure, is how as design professionals we deal with the public meaning of beauty. I'm not going to say much more than that, other than to introduce them. Chanuki Seresinhe is currently head of data science at Zoopla, and she's done research at the University of Warwick, Alan Turing Institute, on online data sets and deep learning. She's had her work published in Economist, Wired, The Times, BBC, Spiegel Online, Guardian, Telegraph, Scientific American, Newsweek, MIT, Technology Review. Very much looking forward to what she has to say. She's coming on first, and she's got a little bit of extra time because she's actually going to explain some of the deep learning techniques she's going to use. Follow that, I'm sure you all know who Stephen Bayley is. If you don't, I'm very sorry. He's an author, critic, columnist, consultant, broadcaster, debater and curator, and general stirrer-up of things. He actually started a BA honours degree on history and theory of art, and he's published a number of books, including Taste, or lack of it, Ugly, The Aesthetics of Everything. I only quote some of the particularly relevant ones, and This is Architecture. I've always wanted to know, so I shall go away and read it. He's a chairman of the Royal Fine Arts Commission Trust, which we just mentioned, a Chevalier de l'Ordre des Arts et des Lettres, I hope my French is okay, honorary visiting professor of Liverpool School of Architecture, honorary fellow of the RIBA, honorary fellow of the University of Wales, and fellow of Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts. So that's just a brief summary of the very long CV that he gave me. Selina Mason, I've known for many years, is Director of Master Planning at LendLease Europe, a very stellar career. She was the Director of Architecture and Design Review at CABE, and she's a part of the Olympic Delivery Authority and London Legacy Development Corporation. I'm not going to say much more than that. They're all on the internet. You can find out much more about them there. I'm much more interested to hear what they've got to say. So, Chanuki, if you'd like to kick off, I think you probably just come here and I come and sit down. I'm not quite sure how this works.
So when we visit truly beautiful places, we immediately get this sense of feeling happier and just feeling more relaxed. And well, it turns out that this isn't just an intuitive connection. When I was working on my PhD at the University of Warwick and the Alan Turing Institute, I was able to create the first large-scale evidence that there is indeed a connection between beautiful places and our well-being. Now, I'm not here to talk about this research. I'm here to talk about how I actually measured the beauty of a place. Now, you're probably wondering how that's possible on a large scale, because normally you would ask people, in a neighborhood, how beautiful is your space or how beautiful is your surroundings? But of course, if we want to do this for an entire country, this is going to be an incredibly timely and costly exercise. So what can we do? Well, these days, we spend a lot of time on the internet. So the internet is a fantastic source of actually gathering data. And I was really excited to come across this website called Scenic or Not. And it's just a game that people play. They rate these images between 1 and 10. But what's happening in the background is that there's 1 image per square kilometer of Great Britain. So when we map out all these beautiful places that people have rated, you clearly see the beautiful places we recognize as coming out in this data. So, it could be places you go hiking on holidays, like the Lake District, the Peak District, or also coastal areas like Devon and Somerset. So So we've got a fantastic data set. So it's 217,000 images rated 1.5 million times. Now, this can help us potentially understand what people actually consider to be beautiful. Now, how do I do that? Well, this is where neural networks come to the rescue. So I use an existing neural network built by MIT. It's called Places. And what I can do is I can put my images through this neural network and I can extract what's actually in the image. So we'll look at each image and tell me, is it a skyscraper? Is it an ocean setting? I can see if it's a man-made, is it a man-made area? Is it a natural area? Is it an open space? So there's lots of different characteristics I can actually extract from that space. So then I can statistically analyze what people actually consider to be beautiful. So it turns out, of course, not surprising, people find a lot of natural features as beautiful. So it'll be coast, valley, mountains, forests and trees. And more surprisingly, we also see built-up features that people find beautiful, characterful buildings like cottage and lighthouse, or bridge-like structures like viaduct and aqueducts. Unsurprisingly, of course, industrial and highway settings are not considered beautiful. Interestingly, though, we see no horizon as something that came out as people not rating as being beautiful. So if you can't actually look out to the horizon or see your space, then people are rating these images down. And then a final interesting finding was that if it was a flat area of grass, people were also downweighting it as not being beautiful. And this is really interesting for that green space, because if it's not an interesting green space, doesn't have valley contours, doesn't have trees, people are not actually going to find it an engaging space. So this was interesting because I can use AI to understand what people actually consider to be beautiful. Just one last thing I wanted to talk about is how I actually created a neural network to predict beauty. Now, I needed to do this because I was doing the research on the connection between beautiful places and our well-being. Now, when I want to do this in an urban area, you can think about like a one image per square kilometer, which is what I have the data from Scenic or not, is not enough. So I actually needed to generate more beauty ratings on a smaller scale. So I need an algorithm to help me out. And it turns out you can do this really fancy technique. It's called transfer learning. So I can take an existing neural network. So this is the Places that I used earlier. That's from MIT. And you could train an existing network that already knows how to detect place to do something else. So I trained it instead to detect beauty, and it worked out really well. So I gave it all the images I found from London from another website called Geographs. There's a documentary website. And I asked it to tell me, where all the beautiful places around London. Is it going to, is it going to be intuitive? And actually it is. So you'll see that, oh yeah, some of the, for some reason the text isn't coming out right. Anyway, the purple dots are scenic, the green dots are, purple dots are super scenic, green dots are scenic, gray is not scenic. And it'll pick up the parks like Regent's Canal, so like Hyde Park, and it'll also pick up paths like Regent's Canal, and it'll also pick up built-up areas. For example, there's a cluster of images that's around St. Paul's, another cluster of images like around Tower of London. So it knows that beauty is not only green spaces, it's also paths as well, like around canal paths, as well as built-up areas. So it's quite a varied understanding of beauty that this algorithm can pick up. So, well, it turns out, can it be that AI actually understands beauty? Well, I would say not quite, but what's actually really fascinating about algorithms like this is that we can use these algorithms to understand the individual preferences of tens of thousands of people and then determine what our collective preference of beauty is. So if you want to find out more about the research, you can go to beautifulplaces.ai, but otherwise, let's get back to the panel.
Well, thank you all very much. It's great fun to be here, or at least it is so far. I think asking questions about beauty, I would think civilized people do all the time, is about as futile as embracing smoke. Although it's actually, I think, quite a positive activity too. I mean, for instance, one thing you'll never ever hear anybody say is, I wish I were less beautiful. For the coronation of George VI in 1937, Robert Byron, the travel writer and architectural commentator, said about architecture, of all the arts, architecture is the nearest to the most people, affects their happiness most closely, obtrudes on their sight most often, and costs them least to enjoy. Now, My own feeling is we've heard quite enough of the time being about sort of functionality, sustainability, value engineering, and so on. I'm also very aware of the contribution which the construction industry, its unsustainable contribution to pollution. And I heard somebody say the other day, wouldn't it be a great idea if we stopped building for 10 years? I think that's something worth thinking about. I'm not, of course, denying the importance of these things. Of course, architects have an obligation to make buildings that are structurally sound and work well and are efficient in every way. I'm just saying, I really do think we're well overdue for prioritizing the look of things. And strangely, beauty, as Robert intimated before, beauty has now become almost a taboo. I mean, the last person, for instance, the last people you'll hear discussing beauty are fine artists. It's a word they find difficult to use. That's why at the Royal Fine Art Commission Trust, we organised the Building Beauty Awards last year. They're going to be repeated this year in London and in Singapore. And incidentally, it's the largest or joint largest cash prize for architecture in this country. Anyway, my own personal interest here is I became interested in architecture as a boy, not because I was interested in drain schedules or load paths, but because architecture seemed, even to a juvenile, it seemed the most complete expression of style. It was an art of such power that I felt it trivialized the others. A poet once said that beauty makes us follow the path that leads to someone or something we love. Beauty is a siren call. And historically, the pursuit of beauty, however defined, it's fundamental to all civilizations. It's essential to well-being and to a cultivated life. Beauty conjures all sorts of illusions which protect us from damaging realities. A beautiful painting, for instance, invites us to enter an imagined world, while a beautiful building intensifies our feeling of life's possibilities. But of course, it's an absolutely impossible subject, not liable to simple explanation or monocausal analysis. I think perhaps beauty is much more, notwithstanding the previous speaker, it's much more a matter of feeling than of formulas. It's much more a matter of natural intelligence rather than artificial ones. When we were just listening, fascinated before, I was wondering why we thought the machines which have learnt to appreciate beauty, I wonder whether they're appreciating those buildings because they're famous or whether they're famous because they're beautiful. We can come to that perhaps in a minute. I think artificial intelligence and neuroaesthetics that relate to things are absolutely fascinating, but I do also happen to think they threaten to drain enchantment from the world. Although I must concede, with each of us has about 100 billion neural receptors, there's quite a lot of scope for accident in our thinking. I also think, in pursuit of thinking what beauty actually is, it's worth making the point that beauty and ugliness are not opposites. They're all part of the same spectrum of behaviour. In the National Gallery, just down the road, the most popular postcard sold in the shop is Quentin Matsis's Ugly Duchess. I mean, it's the Duchess of Austria who's got some terrible deformation of the face called Paget's disease. That way outsells Monet's so-called beautiful water lilies. As I said, there are no answers here, just a lot of very, very interesting questions. Plato and Kant couldn't get to grips with what beauty is, so certainly I'm not going to be able to in the next couple of minutes. And if beauty were easy to define or to analyse with machinery, I think the pursuit of it wouldn't be quite so worthwhile as I feel it is. But there are some couple of essentials which I think are absolutely true. What we call beauty, it's two things. This has nothing to do with style or taste or fashion. What we call beauty engages both the senses and the intellect. I mean, put it this way. I mean, a sizzling steak, if you're a carnivore, engages the senses, but has actually zero intellectual content. But a Mozart melody, by contrast, engages both the senses and the intellect. Personally, I like best of all Stendhal, the novelist's definition of what beauty is. It's the prospect of happiness, but of course happiness itself is difficult to define. Happiness is not when you're thigh-slapping and howling with delight. Happiness is when, I think, just an absence of negatives. And then again, there's the greatest paradox of all about beauty. If, notwithstanding the fact I said it's the pursuit of all civilizations, if everything were beautiful, nothing would be beautiful. you actually need an element of ugliness in order to achieve the contrast. But then it follows, exactly how much ugliness do you need to make beauty a thing of wonder? I mean, I'm saying, should there be quotas? I mean, perhaps there should be quotas for ugliness and indeed for beauty. And this is now more than ever relevant, because the government has said that beauty must in future be a material factor in considering planning applications. So beauty, it's not whimsical and ethereal, it's actually the cash value of art, or at least the cash value of development. And it's really got a social beauty. A couple of American sociologists recently described what they call the beauty premium. That's the beautiful children grow up into more attractive adults who are more professionally successful and therefore make more money. As pioneer industrial designer Raymond Loewy once said, "Le laideur se vend mal," ugliness sells badly. And there's a sexual connection, of course, a sexual connection with everything. So there's a sexual connection with beauty. Of course, the oldest definition of architecture, the famous Vitruvius Trinity, commoditas, firmitas, voluptas. Voluptas is about, it's about attractiveness and carnality. And of course, Vitruvius sexualized the orders of architecture. And on the sexual element, the best contemporary definition I know of beauty comes from Elaine Scarry, who's got the magnificent job of chair of the general theory of value at Harvard. She says, something is beautiful if you want more of it, if you actually want to reproduce it. And I think that's a pretty good test. It applies to buildings, experiences, paintings, and indeed people. Despite these various paradoxes and contradictions, some things are absolutely indisputable. And that is, what we see affects us. And creativity as well is another truth. Which is what we're talking about in making things. Creativity can be quite unruly. And my fear is that design codes, which we're now required to discuss, may actually lead to some awful orgy of historical pastiche. I think we don't want to copy anything in pursuit of beauty. We want to create things. The best statement I ever know about creativity comes from the jazz musician Miles Davis, who said, "I don't play what's there, I play what's not there." As Gustav Mahler said of the nature of tradition and creativity, it's a matter of tending the flame, not of worshipping the ashes. And the sense of beauty is that flame, something both illuminating and also inextinguishable. And in searching for beauty, in the Building Beauty Awards, what we're looking for is not models to imitate, not stuff to be repeated in design codes. We're looking for models to inspire. We don't want to be looking at ashes, we want to be nurturing flames. So thank you very much. There are some Building Beauty little booklets here explaining what's going on for those who've been whipped up into a hysterical enthusiasm for the idea. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I have some scribbled notes here, so I hope I can make some sense of them. It's been a really fascinating afternoon listening to all of this. Obviously I stand here as a developer, the untrustworthy 2%. So thank you for giving me the last word. But my role, I'm very, very conscious as a developer, obviously, of my role in shaping places. The decisions that I make are lasting. They will be there for some time, unless something catastrophic happens and we change things in 30 years' time, which alas happens way too often. But as has been mentioned before, my decisions as a developer are part of a long process of change over a long period of time. We usually pick up a project after many decisions have already been made, many conversations already had. And it's a careful process to kind of continue that. But from my perspective, one of the most important things I do is appoint decent architects, and I think that's fundamental. I've been spending time over the last year or so, every month, walking around London with some friends of mine, mostly architects and one artist. And I do, as Stephen has said, if you talk to artists about beauty and ugliness, then you're into a whole other world. They absolutely do not like talking about beauty. And the interesting thing is, it's an interesting walk walking around London. The London Orbital tells you a lot about how we live and about how a city meets the countryside, and the kind of chaos of the conflicts between infrastructure and suburb and village and field and nature reserve and golf course, sewerage works, all of the stuff of our city sort of found kind of loosely assembled around the edge of the city. And we came across relatively recent, somewhere near Croydon, a development which, as a group of architects, we were pondering, thinking, oh, that's not bad, actually. That's pretty good. And we took a few photographs of it. It had a good landscape, good quality materials, balconies good, nice scale and massing in the city. It was in a suburban area. It was a bit bigger than its immediate surroundings, but we thought it was well judged. There was topography and several buildings that were all kind of talking to each other and the surroundings. We were admiring it. And a man walked past and said, oh, you're looking at our ugly new buildings, I see. And this made us stop. And thinking, oh, what does he mean? And I think we have to acknowledge that as architects, once you start learning about architecture, you're on a journey. You can't go back except through an absolutely willful determination to be mannered, because you've gone beyond a moment. You've learned about stuff. You can't go back to some kind of sense of not knowing what you've learned. And I think that's a huge challenge for us. And obviously an important part of the story is the conversation that we do have with the community and people that we're working with to understand where they're coming from and to gather their thoughts, and to work out how do you confront this kind of collage of different approaches to what makes a good place. And I think the point about the story, though, when we were looking at this and all the judgments that had been made in building this building, we have to acknowledge that the art of designing a building is not one person's endeavour, much as we would like to acknowledge one architect in the process. It's myriads of decisions, some made way before a developer gets involved. The decision I make to appoint the architect is key. The decisions the architect then makes, the contractor, the other designers in the whole panoply of decisions, the multiple participants involved in this, we have to understand this as a collective endeavour across the board, not just us as a developer or the design teams, but also obviously the community as well, and the conversations that we have, the co-design processes, etc. And I think that when we look around, I'm really interested in the commonplace statistics about those people who want to get involved in it, and the kind of yearning almost. 87%, I think it was, people want to be involved in shaping their place. And of course they should. Why shouldn't they? It's part of their happiness and well-being. But I do look around me and I wonder, well, where are these 87 people when they're dealing with their existing environment? This walk around London and the suburbs of London, ugliness is hiding in plain sight. There's a complete decline in our streets and our infrastructure. The high streets, the waste bins that are not collected except once a week and are scattered over the street. The conversion of front gardens in our suburbs to places to park your cars, the sort of slow and steady decline of the original qualities of the place, lost by myriads and myriads of small individual decisions. Nobody is actively saying, I'm going to make this place worse, but somehow or other, we all do collectively. And I think that we need to start thinking a little bit more about our collective responsibility here. And we need to understand that if there is such a thing as beauty, and maybe this conversation might tell us a little bit about what it actually is. I am not the philosopher that Stephen was talking about earlier to define it. But if we do understand it, or if we are able to make any decisions about what it actually is, I think we have to understand that it's subject to atrophy. It changes over time. It's not just change in terms of fashion, but fundamentally, if you have it degenerates if you don't look after it. And I think that's where, to some extent, as a developer, I get a bit frustrated with a lot of these conversations, is I look around me and I wonder, well, where is the husbandry? Where's the collective effort to really nurture our cities, to look after them, and to understand that small decisions as individuals make big changes over a long time to the quality of it? There has to be a much stronger collective focus on it. And I think that also the projects that I do last 15 to 20 years, so that kind of long-term engagement with the people that are going to be using it and surrounding it is an important part of that. And you hope that you can generate the kind of community spirit that will continue once we're long gone. They have the agency to really build on that and maintain its quality. I think that's probably what I wanted to say about this, is that actually beauty, if we get it, we have to really learn how to cherish it and look after it. Because what I see around us is actually a community that aren't necessarily that interested in it. And certainly much of the places where we live today are not what they were when they were first designed.
Look, there's been a lot of talking going on here on stage. I can see a lot of characters in the audience who probably want to say a few things. Yeah, keep the monologues a little bit low, but let's go for it. Can you put your hand up? There are microphones around. Can you introduce yourself beforehand? And you have a whole host of speakers. Just to remind you, we have the speakers who were here earlier on, and some of those can answer questions as well. Put your hands up, speakers, if you want to.
It's okay.
Right, okay. Let's start off over there. Thank you.
I hope this is on, and I'll stand up because I'm very small. My name's Claire Richards. I'm an architect. I'm the founder of Footwork. We back local communities and innovators in communities to bring about change in the place where they live. I want to ask you how to plug a gap that we have identified, and I haven't heard it referred to this afternoon. We have no mechanism for determining who and what is in a place already when we set about beginning the process of regeneration. So when we talk about asking people early in the process, who are we asking? When, as architects and developers, we arrive in a place with a master plan and with development proposals, we don't have this knowledge. So I want to ask, how are we going to find out who and what is there in order to ask their opinion? Now, Mike didn't actually mention that there's some very elaborate work being done around mapping processes. There's something hot off the press called the Better Places Toolkit, where people can both physically and digitally indicate what's important to them, what's beautiful, what needs changing. And if we're not doing this, why? I tell you why it's important. We do not understand the knowledge and the experience that communities hold. And while we don't bother to do that, none of us can be surprised when there's no trust. So to resolve it is a win-win.
Thanks, Claire. Simon, since you've come back on stage, do you want to, or is that too hard for you to start off with?
It's quite a tough one. I think it's a slightly apocryphal question. It's a statement about the concerns you have. I think there isn't one community of people to engage with. There are broad and different communities, different ages. They will all have different views and interests. I think the only kind of short answer I'll give is Will Alsop, who was known as a painter, a kind of visionary, and a kind of man who went off into a room with a few bottles of wine and did his own work. Having been involved in a number of community in consultations, said to me, it's rather good, it makes you think harder. And that's a good enough reason for me to do it. You can't hear all the voices, you can't answer all the questions, but you have to think harder. And that must be good for all of us to think a little bit harder about what we do and why we do it and who we're doing it for.
I'm going to keep asking questions, and we can ask, so if anyone wants to answer more, we can, but just so we can get more people an opportunity. Hands up again if there's anyone who'd like to. Yes, please. Microphone down here coming to you.
Hi there, thank you. I'm Bruce Buckland, architect and host of the Theory of Architecture podcast. Excuse me. The kind of AI work that you're doing there, which I think is absolutely fantastic, and there's a huge amount of research now being done using the kind of things you're doing, as I'm sure you're aware of. I suppose my question is directed mostly to Nicholas, since he's in charge of or related to the design code work.
Million advisor.
I can't see the current mechanism by which that kind of scientific work will feed into the way that design codes or national model design codes are produced. As more of that work is done, what will be the mechanism that allows that work to feed into a constant updating of the model design codes to ensure that we have them be scientifically based?
Nicholas?
So I think a local design code needs to be a conversation between the democratically elected council, the professionals advising them, and the wider public. So I think the key way that information comes in, and I say this fully conscious that I'm in RIBA, is actually by the professionals, be they architects, planners, highways consultants, actually being aware of it. And one of the reasons I actually chucked in quite a prosperous career I had before I set up Create Streets to do this was because as I started getting more and more interested in the built environment and reading this research and finding it in obscure journals, I realized, and I'm sure it's not true of anyone in this room, but a surprising number of architects and planners and professionals, I'm afraid, didn't. And many, dare I say it, still haven't. So I think that key mechanism is by you and your colleagues in the professions being on top of that information. I think that has to be the key way, and then holding that in constant tension with the public who may not always be convinced, which is as it should be.
Thank you again, and thank you for asking, for pointing out to someone. Now, it's all been very polite so far. Can we raise it a little bit? We mentioned about being critical, so it's fine. You don't have to be shy. Okay, there's someone who wants to say something. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Cole Wagner. I'm a master's student at UCL studying project management, and this is mainly a question on the development side of things, actually. I am very interested to know if there is any, what this means from an execution perspective to be implementing beauty, and if there are any perspectives anyone has. I mean, obviously, I imagine you have the most things to say, but given what I know of construction both in New York, where I'm from, and here, it's an interesting prospect.
Maybe Selina, you might have a take on that.
Well, we're not consciously implementing beauty at the moment. It's
You
not
will,
a conversation
Selina, you will.
I'm having. But I certainly would hope that the developments that we're doing are not ugly. So, I mean, we're the whole design code issue is an interesting one for us. We do the projects that we're working on are of a scale anyway where we have a code. The master plan is going to be delivered over a long period, so there has to be a code with it because it's an outline consent. So we're developing codes with the community and with the local authority at the moment, which are loosely reflecting the national model design code as that's becoming something increasingly the planners are interested in seeing how they work together. In terms of beauty, particularly, this is something that we're going to be interested in having a conversation with DLUHC about. And, well, what do you mean? And how is this going to create a coherent setting for us where we're able to deliver with certainty? And I think the big question I have is that on many, many matters, we can have as many conversations as is possible with the wider community and all of our stakeholders, but in the end, decisions have to be made by developers and designers. You can't take the design out of the hand of the designer. You can give them a framework within which they need to design, and you can test that. But I think that, and this is something that's kind of an evolving conversation. I think.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that actually. The common, we've been absolutely clear. Producing codes doesn't make things beautiful. If it was, we'd all have paint by numbers and we'd all be Titian. What it does is actually it creates a framework for things to be made beautiful by good design. Good design is produced by good designers, it's not produced by codes. What codes can do is actually create a clearer framework and stop some of the worst, the worst things happening. And certainly, I'm a designer, as none of the people are here. You design within a framework. You always do. There's never not a framework. So all you're really doing is actually relating that framework much more strongly to the place and much more strongly to the communities that are in it. But there's a common confusion, the idea that somehow the codes are just going to make good design. There has to be latitude, and this has already been said. You can code doorknobs if you want to. But if you end up coding everything, it's not a code, it's a design. So somewhere in there, there has to be that limitation. There has to be the opportunity for creativity and the opportunity to make things beautiful. And actually, following from Stephen, I'm afraid some of it is just going to be ugly, according to some people. I'm afraid it just is. And damn good thing, too, because some people find some things ugly, things beautiful. But there you go. I think we're very clear about that. I just want a brief word, I'm sorry, lady over there, about communities. I mean, my wife's book club is a community. My brother-in-law's golf club is a community. My village is a community. My county is a community. If you want to actually shut up sociologists forever, lock them in a room and ask them to define community, because they'll never come out again. So we have to be very careful about how we actually define communities in this context.
Thanks, Robert. Now, hands up in the air again. Can I see anyone at all? Yeah, Holly, can we just get the microphone to you, and then I'll come over to you. Okay, next.
I feel like I'm going to regret this. I thought the AI presentation was really, really interesting. Holly Lewis speaking earlier. I wonder if there's a point at which it breaks. There's quite a lot of grey in London, and we're not going to knock down all of London. And it also groups an awful lot together. And I wonder if, at the point where we're talking about the aesthetics of buildings, if we can still do this sort of homogenisation of answer. The most recent experience that I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about this conversation about beauty, rather than design coding, because I think design coding for good design sounds brilliant, but this superstitious word of beauty. I was judging an architectural design competition, and the architect was describing the building as civic. This is a civic building, a big, quite imposing thing, and one of the other judges said, I find it colonial. And I worry that there are unconscious biases in conversations around beauty that are not spoken about, that there's a big assumption of Western architectural education that comes implicit in these conversations, and we don't talk about it. And I think we also then assume that we're going to be able to solve it with, well, the AI says that everybody agrees on these things, and that's lovely, and that sort of brushes some of it under the carpet. And I think that underlies this conversation, and Paul, you wanted to spice it up, so...
Great, Holly. That's I'll give you the envelope later. I'm going to come to Chanuki, but I'd have thought the other part about the AI is the number of people it's sampling is far more than a small conversation about beauty. But I'd be interested in Chanuki's view on this.
I thought your comment was really insightful. You're right, AI is not perfect, and there are massive limitations. And we have to be aware of those limitations when we actually understand how we use them. So you're right. So the first thing is that I don't know who's rating these images, but I can assume that they're probably from Western countries. There's probably a completely different understanding of beauty in another culture, and we have to be aware of that. So if you want to kind of do AI ethically, and if this actually became, say, a program that people use, then you'd have to be more conscious to make sure you're capturing the opinions of a wide variety of people. So then you kind of have that covered. And I think it's also okay to have subsets of things. So you might have an urban idea of beauty. You might have a countryside idea of beauty. Like, we don't have to be prescriptive and say this is one type of beauty that goes everywhere. And another connection with the beauty thing is that, so I find a connection between beauty and our well-being. So maybe we can, if we can find which elements of beauty are actually connected to human well-being, then maybe those are the things we want to focus on, rather than there might be stylistic differences. I mean, they always exist. So that might be the nuance that we're after.
Stephen, I know you for the Boiler House, the Design Museum, Universal Good Taste. What's your view on it? Because you've studied this, that notion for years. What are your reflections on it?
Clearly these are enormous questions. As I said, they eluded Plato and Kant, so they're certainly going to elude us. I was going to interrupt us before, but I was going to say for the last word as well, I love something which Serge Gainsbourg, that grizzled old French chanteur, once said. He said, ugliness is superior to beauty because it lasts longer. But I think I mentioned before are the Building Beauty Awards. That really is just an extension of what Paul flattered me. I mentioned it when I used to work with the late Terence Conran, who started off the Boiler House project in the V&A, trying to popularise design, then built the original design museum. And what our feeling was there, it's exactly the same as we're trying to do with the Building Beauty Awards there, and that's to say, not to offer standards or principles, but just to offer inspiration. And Terence Conran made his fortune out of shops which surprised the public by showing the public things they hadn't hitherto thought available. And he trusted the public, trusted the public's taste, if you like. In fact, what Conran's whole achievement, if you like, was, we talk about the beauty, there is a beauty premium I think, in architecture and development. And what Terence Conran did with genius was sort of monetizing his own taste. And I don't say that in mockery, but it was a very, very, very clever thing to do. I have to say, I'm terribly interested in artificial intelligence and neuroaesthetics. I'm just skeptical about the results, in the same way as I'm actually skeptical about all ideas about consultation. And I'm sure you must all know the most famous dismissive remark about the consultative process. It came from Henry Ford, the pioneer of the automobile, and he said if I'd asked the public what they wanted, they would simply have said, faster horses.
Actually, there's another one from a lawyer about consultation, which is patronize and ignore. I think I'm sure everyone probably agrees with this, but I'll just raise it, is to say that beauty is not an absolute. We know from anthropology, we know from history that it moves and it shifts. We know that. And I know that my children hate things that I think are beautiful and vice versa. That's just the way it goes. But if you're actually doing something for a group of people, the best you can do is to make sure you're doing something that accords as best you can with how they feel about it. And this seems to me entirely reasonable. But unless you actually believe in the golden section, which I don't, or some other divine origin of beauty, it is tractable. But we know from very good research that you can educate people, and mostly architects, into thinking some things are beautiful that everyone else doesn't. Lots of research that demonstrates this. So there we are. But a consultation and a coding process can at least grasp the moment and grasp something that whatever the community is, I have to say this very carefully now, that whatever the community is will accord with. And that's the best you can do. You can't do any better than that.
Can I say very, very quickly, I didn't realize Robert Adam was a golden section denier, but that's very interesting. But my understanding of neuroaesthetics is that one of the reasons why the golden section, which approximates the ratio 8 to 13, why it actually works is because it more or less corresponds to the field of vision of the human eye. And I do think, notwithstanding my skepticism about the results so far from AI and neuroaesthetics, my own feeling is that there may actually be constants in beauty. I think what Robert was talking about before, how ideas change from generation to generation, that's just taste. Taste does do, the only certain thing about taste is that it does inevitably change. But I do actually, notwithstanding my skepticism about AI and neuroaesthetics, I do suspect that fundamentally there are some sets of proportions, sets of color relations, sets of whatever, which people do tend to find more agreeable than others.
A conversation over lunch sometime.
Okay, let me just see
a delicious and beautiful
people
lunch.
who want to do quite good. Okay, so I'm going to take a couple of gentlemen over there, please. Actually, William first, and then if you can pass it along, William, that would be great. Great if you can say who it's to as well, and don't forget the people on the front row.
Well, I'm William Murray, and I'm an advisor to developers on how to make successful places, and a developer. And I've loved today. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. I love the idea of listening to people, the idea that we might go to a place and agree objectives before we tell people what we're going to do. What are we trying to achieve here before telling them how we're going to achieve it? But I think we're talking about two different things, which is places And one of my favourite quotes, as we've done lots of lovely quotes, is from a colleague of mine, which is, there are loads of great places surrounded by shit buildings, and there are loads of shit places surrounded by great buildings. It's not necessarily about the buildings, it's about the people in them and what the people do. And so both of those things are critically important. Of course we have to make beautiful places, but we also have to make places in which people want to live, and I think it's not necessarily about those buildings. And the other thing is that, we've heard very little about clients, and I know, Selina is here, but actually it does require people who want to deliver those sorts of places. And I think the really successful stories we've heard are when there are people in there who desperately want those things to happen, that there are those kind of their red lines that they make successful places. So, what's more important? Is it the place and what happens on the ground floor, or is it the beauty?
Thanks. Can you pass it over to the gentleman on you at the end of your array as well, and we'll take another one. I thought that was going to be a monologue then, William, but you came up with a question in the end. That was great. Thank you.
Hi, Richard Guys, architect planner. I think the conference was a bit round the wrong way. We got on at last to talking about beauty after a lot of discussion about coding, which was great. So I think that you have to start with what we want and then think about how we want to achieve it. And perhaps it would have been a slightly different conference if we'd have done that. I was interested in Canny's idea about reverse briefing. Perhaps we ought to sort of think, what makes this place nice? Why do we want to stay here a bit longer than there? And sort of take that apart and try and put a code around that. For instance, it may be all sorts of townscape principles of enclosure or delight, or the way the sun hits certain places, or the way people populate active frontages. But we could codify that. So rather than, pardon me, think about what places are nice and then unpack them. And that involves both community insights, but also the things that, as professionals, we can bring to the party, things like notation, things like analysis through digital means. So I'll stop there. I'm
going to go to Canny on the front row to see what her thoughts on that. And so if you could, Canny's, if you get the microphone. I'm going to have time for a few more questions, but I want them to be quick, if that's okay. So, but first of all, I'll just come to Canny and some of the panel.
So you picked up on this word reverse briefing. That was something that Frank Duffy, who was the president here, believed in a lot. And I think that the world of work, the world of hermits, there's a need to actually go to the source, really, rather than invent things, narratives around middlemen. I guess that's all I need to say, really.
Thanks. Okay, buildings or places? Who's going to speak there? Nicholas, you have a go at that one.
I'll be very quick. Buildings, or at any rate, vertical infrastructure are a critical part of place. I think Chanuki brought up the fact that actually people don't much like just fields of grass. How a place is enclosed critically matters to people's response to it. If you apply Chanuki's algorithms to London or to cities, you find that the most popular places often have a bit of greenery, but not necessarily, but are well enclosed with variety in a pattern, complex, coherent complexity, and some sort of variety and texture. If I can just quickly add one other thing, and that actually I think comes back to Holly. It's a very good question. Thank you very much for asking that, because the good news is you're very importantly wrong, but in the best possible sense, in the sense that when you look at the pricing and the polling data, because look, there's lots in this society and other societies that we do disagree on. But actually our response to place, and there have been lots of polls and lots of work on this and lots of pricing data, is actually remarkably consistent across demographic, age, race, sex, region. And actually as you look at responses in different countries, the same patterns emerge. I remember years ago, I used to live in China, and a Chinese lady I'd worked with, very much from a different world to me, came to the UK, and I was showing her around my parents' town in rural Bedfordshire, and she responded to it. She obviously doesn't come from Bedfordshire, but her ability to respond to places, actually in what felt safe, what felt beautiful, what felt lovely, where she wanted to take photographs, was actually quite consistent to if I take an English person around that town. So I think there are important things. It comes back, here's something I didn't think I'd ever say. I agree with Steve and Bayley, that actually there are patterns that we find reassuring and comforting that I think are fairly innate in the human condition. Yes, they get overlaid by our own personal experience, but the good news is I think it is something we can largely agree on, and buildings are part of it.
Okay, I'm going to look to the back because I haven't looked up there yet, and there's a lady there with her hand up very high, if you could keep going. Is anyone else? So we'll go in front of Robin, and Ben will after that. Okay, so three, we'll have all three in one go if that's okay, because we're running out of time. Thank you.
I'm Charlotte Norman, I'm a landscape
and
architect.
Shorter if that's okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's very short. Is it relevant or is it potentially even decadent to talk about beauty when a lot of people can't afford a home?
Thank you for that question, very relevant. And can we go? Sorry? Yep.
Am I allowed to ask a question, Paul?
Thanks. Hello, Esther.
Very quick question. Esther Curland, Officer Place Transition Board member. What advice does everybody have for the architectural profession to learn from the very good coding with master plans on sites, you know the site, which is generally the experience of coding, I guess, in this country to date, to transition into the area-wide codes that LURB, etc., will be asking for, where you don't know the site that you're coding. So it's not about beauty, question about coding.
Okay, thank you. And Ben, I think you had a question.
Can we account for Manhattan?
Okay. Did you say can we?
Can we account for Manhattan?
Can we account for Manhattan? Okay. Simon, do you want to take that final one, if that's okay?
Thanks. I mean, look, there is a danger. I mean, I think it's great that we're having this conversation. I mean, Mies made this famous description of the Seagram building, which is in Manhattan. He talked about technology, he talked about organisational systems, he talked about the frame, he talked about cladding in concrete, he talked about cladding in bronze for about an hour and a quarter. And at the end of it all, his technical justification, he said, but of course, we did it like that because we liked the way it looked. And we're not all going to like the way everything looks, but certainly all of us, I believe, when we're making projects, we think at the time at least, we like what we're doing, and that like will be to do with its appearance. Because most people do not enter buildings, they walk past them, yeah? So buildings talk back to people. I kind of agree with William's analysis. I think buildings are temporary enclosures that come and go, and spaces and streets have characters, even though the buildings change much more than we ever realise if you look at a kind of history of any city. But we're not going to find a universal happy definition of beauty. I think I had a note which isn't beauty is in the eye of, I won't say any more, but Socrates said beauty is a short-lived tyranny. And I think that goes back to this idea of fashion and changes. And we know that certain things will go in and out of fashion. And when we talk about community, communities change. If we design buildings for the community, first of all, it's a question of who and what is the community. And secondly, be damn sure that that community will not be there in 15 or 20 years' time, but the building, if it's going to fit the current criteria of long life, loose fit, will be there. But it seems to me conversation is really important to understand who's thinking about what now, and kind of as designers to actually listen and hear things, because that makes you uncomfortable. If you're uncomfortable, you have to think harder. And so I think a lot of us are uncomfortable with using the word beauty. We would never, most architects would never stand up and say, I've designed this building, I think it's rather beautiful. They'll talk about the ease through which people move and look at it, how it sits in the light, the kind of longevity of it, the generosity of the plan, the flexibility. Now they'll talk about, because of the fashions, they'll talk about carbon content, very relevant. But actually, to me, part of this is this continuous discourse to kind of question what we're doing and why we're doing it. We'll all take different responses away from today, but I think it's a really valid conversation, because if we start at least saying we did it like that because we liked the way we'll at least be kind of beginning to raise this debate, and the more we discuss it, the more we're going to kind of find disconnects and connects, and that's kind of engaging. That's a kind of consultation amongst the community of people involved in helping to, rethink, rebuild, re-energise the environment.
Could I just link very briefly two of the questions? Manhattan is coded, and very strictly coded in some ways. In fact, they discovered that the street wall was very important and actually started to enforce it when people started to produce plazas. I would link that to the poverty issue or the lack of housing. One of the things that happened in the States was that projects had to look cheap because they were public money. In other words, they had to look horrid, otherwise people would accuse them of misspending public money. I really don't think that A, beauty is expensive, and B, that if we're going to house people quickly, cheaply and efficiently, which of course we must do, that means we should not pay attention to beauty, quite the reverse.
And may I just say a quick word about the homelessness question, which of course is immensely significant. I don't think it's at all a feat and wasteful to talk about beauty. Beauty, I believe, has a cash value because beauty encourages prosperity, and prosperity creates tax income, which benefits everybody.
Yeah, by the way, Ben, I must compliment you on a very short question, so I appreciate that an awful lot. I think it was answered, not quite sure. You might have to take that up later. Got time for maybe a couple more, and then that really will be it. So, okay, in the middle there, Matthew, and lady who's been waiting a while, I keep missing.
Hello, Matthew Lloyd, architect. I just wonder, this current debate about beauty, how much is it related to our massive problem of over-density at the moment? Maybe it's a question for Nicholas.
If we can, Nicholas will answer that in a second. If we can pass it on to the lady.
Thank you, Paul. This is Ruth Reid, the lady who used to be first woman president of the RIBA.
Good to see you, Ruth.
Thank you. I work in the countryside. The huge barrier is the attitude of people to any development. I think we have a massive wall to climb in terms of making beauty, make it acceptable. I really honestly think that we are having a conversation within the confines of London. I've yet to hear it spreading out to the regions. I think that we have to know that most people would see a sterile, ecologically sterile, visually sterile field as more beautiful than new housing. And that's the barrier that I have to climb all the time.
Thank you. Joanna's still here. I'd like her to... What is it? Just this? Is just a London conversation? What we've been doing today, Joanna? Do you think? If we can, so we'll get you a microphone. Is the work that your group have been doing is just involved in London?
No. I mean, the conversation about design quality and beauty and National Model Design Code, is that the question as to whether it's London focused?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. No. For the geeks in the room, there's a footnote in the NPPF, National Planning Policy Framework, that says design coding is a material consideration to planning applications in the here and now. So this kind of the menu of issues that should be playing out in any development. Obviously, there is an emphasis on housing development because that's where the mediocre and the undesigned is happening. And that's current and it's in the system now. And then we're moving towards supporting, obviously, local authorities in terms of preparation of design codes, and particularly as it becomes a requirement within the planning system. So we're on this journey, and I think this conversation has been really powerful, and I just repeat my point about it'll take all of us to, support our clients, support our communities, support local authorities to have the capacity and resources to sort of take some of this stuff forward. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great, Joanna. It's Ruth's question. But Nicholas, if you could do it, and you will, very fortunate, Nicholas, have the last word almost. So you can also add anything else you want to at the end of it before you hand it to Simon.
Gosh, that's a very dangerous thing to say. Thank you for an excellent question. I think it's one of the important threads coming into this conversation about how our planning system works, where regionally we grow, and what the quality of the places that we create is, both for the user, the resident, and for the passer-by. Look, as we've touched on, I think, several times during this conversation, perhaps not have taken on fully frontal, we have a very peculiar planning system in this country, which puts all the focus at the development control end of the funnel and not at the strategic setting a clear vision end of the panel. As I didn't talk about and won't at length now, when you do comparative studies of planning systems, our local plans are the least certain, normally the least visual. They cover the widest area and they have the least effective input from the wider public. We've got to bring the democracy forward, and so the reason this matters and comes back to your question about high density is that the consequence of that is far fewer sites come forward for development. And quite reasonably, actually, a combination of central government, local government and developers therefore end up getting into a vicious circle in the south of the country. It's a bit different in the north and less prosperous areas, but in the south where the land values and the demand can not only take it but can demand it, literally, we end up super densifying a limited number of sites. Where we ultimately need to get to, and this is perhaps going beyond what you're expecting me to say, so forgive me, but is if you look back, as Simon was just saying, if you look back at the history of our towns and streets, over decades, over centuries, in fact, in a few cases over millennia, they have intensified and densified gradually and organically, normally, not always, following what is acceptable through local codes and rules. It is not new that we regulate our built environment. The Romans did it, the Greeks did it, it happened in the Indo-European continent. We've got the first extant rules in London from memory from the late 12th century, banning non-slates on roofs so you don't burn down your neighbours. So if we can pull some of the democracy forward and make it easier in an acceptable way for our existing street infrastructure to intensify with local consent, there'll be less pressure on that limited number of sites to go to super density. And yes, to finally answer your question, there are very, very clear disbenefits to super density unless it works best for very rich people in the town centre because they can cope with a much higher running cost and the social discounts. And often, they don't tell you this when they do the work, but often those super rich people with a small flat in central London also have a second home, and that really helps.
If I can answer, sorry,
Nicholas, if I can just
Ruth's question, because Ruth, no one's really had a reply to Ruth's point. I just want a point. I think it's a general planning point about the purpose of all of this, in a way, is to increase confidence in what developers might produce, and therefore, I mean, it'll probably take a decade or so to get over this, or more. But nonetheless, if more, the figures we've seen on the lack of trusted developers, if you can actually produce a process where people are genuinely engaged, you are more likely to get support. I only say more likely. But no one really answered. I live in a village. I'm very sensitive to London, to the sole London viewpoint.
This morning, sorry, Paul. You can turn my microphone off. This morning, actually, a site we've been working on for actually quite, not dense in a London sense of the word, but terraced housing round a village green in the countryside, abutting an existing settlement, got through planning against officers' advice, because it doesn't really follow the current local plan. It does, I think, follow national strategy, because the planning committee universally accepted it because it fitted in just so naturally. We have to change that around. My challenge, my hopefully constructive challenge to all of us and to all of you is we have to move from a situation where the instinctive response of the British public to new development and new housing, whatever they know they should think, is that we will oppose it. That is our challenge, I think, collectively, as different professionals working in this environment. So that's my attempt at the last word.
Thanks,
I promise I'll shush.
Well, I think, please, Selina, go on.
Sorry.
Yes, okay.
I want the last word. Can I just point out that people in this room are probably not going to be designing most of the housing built in this country. It's house builders who design it, and they don't use architects. Can we stop talking about developers and talk about house builders
Sorry,
well,
Paul,
please?
but I agree that's their failing, but if I may, that's a challenge to architects as well. Why don't they use architects, and how do we fix it?
Who in the audience would like to answer that one? I'm sure there is someone. I'm looking around. Okay. Maria, you're going to answer that one, are you?
I'm Maria Kramer, Senior Lecturer at the University of Westminster and Director of Room 102, and that was actually one of my questions. If 80% of stuff that's being built is housing, and it taps into the question of density and height, how dense and high can you build, and how long is it beautiful when the criteria, the main criteria, is to make commodities and to make money. And I think that's anti-beauty, and I think it's a systematic issue that actually what the majority that is being built is house building, it's not architecture.
Thanks, Maria, but I'm not opening up to questions again. I was asking the audience a question about, because most of the room is full of architects, why architects do not get involved with the house building world, and why house builders do not pick architects. Can anyone got any? Thank you, Russ. So, anyone else have an answer to that one? And then we really will call it a day.
Am I allowed to speak here? Because David Wilson once told me he lost 15% of land value if he had an architect novated to him on a scheme.
Thanks, Robert. Okay, Russell.
Hi, I'm Russell Curtis. I'm an architect. I think one of the reasons that large-scale house builders don't tend to use architects is because the discussion is not is about whether we build or not. It's not an acceptance, I don't think, that we have to build the number of houses that we need for the future of this country. And so if all you do is stand up against house building, and we don't have a discussion about, we don't have an acceptance amongst the public that we need to deliver the number of homes that we do. We have to move from that position to accepting that we need to deliver these homes, and then let's have a discussion about what those homes look like. At the moment, it's a binary choice between build or don't build, regardless of the quality.
I disagree with Russell, a great danger personally to myself, but actually I think in most of the polling, the public do agree in principle that we need new homes. They just don't want it here.
I think you dodged the question there, Russell, but it was a very good point, thank you. And I've got Joanna might answer the point, I think, which is about why architects are so few architects involved in the housing design for house builders.
The majority of housing schemes that come forward in the country, not in metropolitan London or even, you could argue, metropolitan central Manchester, comes through as an outline planning application. The only things that are fixed at that point are probably where the road comes into the site and the number of units that are put on that site. They may include a parameters plan. They may include something called an illustrative master plan, and those things may be conditioned. What they often don't include is actually any detailed layout that's being fixed, never mind the architecture of the homes, never mind really the sort of section of the street and the things that will actually make the place come to life from all the conversation we've been having. That's quite a fascinating issue to do with planning, because the idea is that the developer establishes that they can develop the site to a certain amount of, basically, quantum of homes. Unfortunately, that usually doesn't take an architect to get those decisions over the line. And so what's fascinating about design coding is it's sort of the extent to which you can set out some of those requirements before you get to that point of even an outline application. And then how a local authority hopefully feels empowered to then, through reserve matters and the subsequent design, pursue the qualitative agendas that we've been talking about. That's actually the nature of the system. It's far from ideal. And if Andrew Taylor is still in the room, I would really put him on the spot, because we do have a house builder in the room who actually has demonstrated that organisations like Countryside have built homes to last and of quality with good landscapes. He might be here, but that's
Ben's got one more.
analysis of some of the problem.
Having asked a short question, he's now not going to.
Ben Derbyshire. I'm chair of HDA Design, and we design a lot of housing for all sorts of people, including the major house builders. Chipperfield once notably said, the design of housing should be of purely academic interest to any self-respecting architect. And I think, at the heart of the problem is profound mistrust. The house builders mistrust us because we don't understand their business. We mistrust the house builders because they're preventing us from delivering what it is we think we're in business to deliver, which is something other than what house builders need. So my practice has spent forever trying to find an accommodation, between the house builders and designers, and we don't think we've got all the way there yet. But one of the fundamentals, and I think a real problem for designers of housing, is that the mistrust of standard types. All of our cities are built of standard types. We love the streets that are built of standard types. House builders have evolved standard types, and there are shortcomings, and the space standards in them are appalling for most house builders, but we have to understand that typologies are important.
Thank you, Ben. And no more, sorry. We're going to run out, the bar will shut upstairs. Yeah, we haven't got it for too long. Just to say, I'm sure most of the panel will still be here when they go upstairs, so you can ask further questions to them. I'd like to think that what you've seen today, there are a lot of opportunities for architects, for work for architects and urban designers and landscape architects. And that was one of the main reasons for for organising this conference. I'm going to hand back to Simon Allford now to finish closed proceedings.
My notes say highlight a few interesting key points that were raised. I'm not going to attempt to do that. No, there are lots of key points raised. I just want to come back to the house building ones. I think it's kind of beauty. We're now most architects are actually involved in larger scale, more complex buildings. To me, the failing of house building is not the houses may not be fantastic, their space standards may be poor. It's actually comes back to this idea of place. It's the layout that I think is completely appalling. It's the domination by the car. It's the idea of sort of standalone, detached at all costs. These are some of the problems. In our practice, we happen to have worked with some house, or a particular house builder who wanted to rethink the model because he came from outside. And actually, all the lessons are there in history. Terracing is rather good. It's rather good in terms of carbon, because you're not building such wall-to-floor ratios. It's rather good in terms of density. It can work acoustically. And so I think, this thing about beauty and the suspicion we have of the word beauty, and in a sense that the suspicion we have as a profession of even discussing it, and then the suspicion we have about design codes, is all what today was about, is kind of opening up the floor, airing what is happening, and then thinking, I'll go back to Charles and Ray Eames, and they said, without constraint, there is no design. And I was encouraged by the idea that if we react to codes that emerge, sometimes they're not telling us, what to do exactly, but they are giving us a new suite of constraints. Often we say, planning is too uncertain. We have no idea what we're doing. We're throwing a coin in the air and waiting to see what lands. But actually, whether it's, codes or consultation, with different forms of the community, these are all things that take us out of our comfort zone. And I think, what this kind of raises to me today is most of the great housing that you might be talking about, the typological systems, were not designed by architects, right? They were actually designed by house builders. But there's been a failure. We've lost connection with the past. So as a profession, we have also tended to narrow ourselves down to what we think is interesting. I'm encouraged by the challenges of retrofit, because I think actually what all of today has been about is looking at a place, finding what's there. That's the people, that's the building, that's the communities that are there. It's also the clients, and then thinking, how do we engage and build on that place? It might be kind of rethinking that place, or it might be kind of reworking that place, but you're working with something rather than a new. And the brave new world is kind of the most dangerous place to be. Building on existing infrastructures of people and architecture and place is a better place to be. So I think that's the challenge to us as a very disparate group of people today, is to all kind of go away and reflect on the different presentations. What's coming down the line in the codes and the government's work is something that we either, in my opinion, we either address it, become part of it, and help engage with a new suite of clients who don't engage with architects, or we do what we have tended to do with many services over the years, is we withdraw from another field of influence and leave it to someone else, and then we moan that we're not involved in planning processes, or indeed that there's 17 other consultants involved with us and we're marginalised. So I haven't got the answers for that, but I think that's what this is about. Us being challenged, and I mean by us, those of us who work in the built environment, whether it's regulating it, government guidance, commissioning it, or being part of the design review, consultation, engagement. So I think that's what something like this is about. I think it's been a really successful and interesting thing. I don't think there are answers, but I think there's lots of kind of questions that will bounce around, hopefully in the bar upstairs. So I'd like to thank all the speakers. I'd like to thank the Housing Minister. It's great that there's that engagement with government. I'd like to thank the Office for Place, specifically Sophie Law and Paul Monahan, who I've known for many years. Thank you. Well done, everyone.